Welcome to this special edition of CUNY Honors. I'm Matthew Goldstein, the Chancellor of the City University of New York. Anyone who has lived in New York is familiar with Ted Keel. Ted has spent more than a half a century resolving some of the city's and the country's most difficult labor disputes. In the past several years, his longtime passion for environmental advocacy has intensified, growing out of his work with the United Nations. He formed the Earth Pledge Foundation to emphasize sustainable development. He founded the Carriage House Center on Global Issues to encourage dialogue about the global agenda, and he has established the Nurture New York's Nature Foundation. Welcome, Ted. With Ted is John Woolman, professor of biology at Queens College. For 20 years, John was a scientist with the Hudson River Foundation. He received his PhD from the Joint Program in Evolutionary Biology at CUNY and the American Museum of Natural History. John recently wrote a book on the environment of New York Harbor. Thank you both for joining us. As a public university serving New York's 5 boroughs, CUNY is acutely aware of the environmental challenges faced by our city. It gives me great pleasure to announce that at its November board meeting, CUNY's trustees approved the creation of the CUNY Institute to Nurture New York's Nature. Located at Queens College, this institute came about because of the vision and generosity of Ted Keel. It is a remarkable commitment to the nature of New York City and to nurturing its future. Thank you so much, Ted, for your largesse and your vision, and we look forward to working with you and with you as the years go ahead for this important effort. Ted, let me start with you. Your name is synonymous with mediation and conflict resolution. Some would say you're the quintessential peacemaker. How did that work lead to your interest in environmental issues?
Well, that's a good question. I've been thinking about it myself. Actually, what happened was coincidental. For a variety of reasons, I became involved in the Earth Summit, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development that took place in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. That was my first major exposure to the question of environment and development and the clash between the two. What interested me, in light of my experience in conflict resolution, was that the conference came up with the ultimate solution to the conflict between protecting the environment, which is essential, and having economic development, which is essential. But they are frequently in conflict with each other. The solution proposed in Rio, that is still the only solution that people have come up with to the environmental problem and the damage done by indiscriminate development, is sustainable development. And I saw sustainable development as a solution to a conflict, a form of conflict resolution. And I have continued to view the problem of environment and development from that point of view.
So the issue of resolving conflict was really something that was the catalyst that took you from labor disputes into this world.
Precisely.
John, given that there are many environmental activist groups, and we're surrounded by many, there are foundations and agencies in the New York area, what do you see in particular as the role of the CUNY Institute to nurture New York's nature? How is it going to be different? What is it going to do that others are now not doing?
I think there's a really vacant niche there. I see the environmental activist groups quite often either being very focused on particular corners of the city and very small problems, or being large national organizations or international organizations, but they're not being an appropriate scale of an institute like this to this problem. And I think that we can serve as kind of a nexus between the foundations and the agencies which are looking for solutions and for problems to be brought up in a rational sense. And I see this as a centrality that we can probably bring together these different forces that require some kind of unison. So it'll be a central kind of role, basically.
So really a university is the core intellectual effort here, bringing together natural scientists, social scientists, others, political people who are interested in political issues together to understand the issues and then work with foundations for support. That's basically the
I think foundations are often looking for direction. You know, typically a foundation can't afford to have a huge overhead and have many specialists, so they have generalists who are out there looking for direction. And I think that we can, in a sense, harvest ideas from the local environmental activists and the agencies who are looking for help and bring that to these larger foundations and funding agencies and provide that connection that I think is lacking right now.
Ted, talk about the origin of nurturing New York's nature. What do you see as the biggest environmental challenges as you look at the landscape of New York City now?
I think the biggest challenge is a lack of public awareness of how important it is to the health and well-being of the people who live here that they protect the nature of the city in which they live. And to set an example from this great city for other cities of the world that are facing the same problem. This is a tremendous challenge, and it's not nearly as well understood as it might be. It's ironic that during the recent election campaign, this issue, which in my judgment ultimately will be more important than terrorism, was hardly mentioned at all. And I think our challenge is to create public awareness of the importance of this issue.
I mean, just walk the streets of Manhattan on a midday in, say, April or May. The spewing of all of the fossil fuels from cars and buses can be so overwhelming. I mean, that to me is clearly an important issue on the very vitality of our respiratory health and other kinds of health. Certainly that's going to be an issue that you would be dealing with, I would imagine.
I hope so. That is very important. I think this whole question of transportation, this wonderful subway system we have, which is way underused, primarily in my opinion because the price is too high, and the cost to the public of maintaining automobile traffic is infinitely greater than the cost of transportation. And there is an opportunity, I think, through proper study to connect the traffic congestion. I was almost late in coming here today. I was so nervous sitting in the car waiting for the traffic to get thin out so I could get here on time. The traffic congestion of this city and the carbon dioxide being spewed out as the result is a product of the increase in the subway fares. From the time it was 5 cents from 1904 to 1947, it has gone from 5 cents up to $2. And every time the fare went up, more people switched from mass transportation to automobile transportation. It's a major issue I think we have to look into.
You know, John, we have a wonderful transportation institute in the City University of New York, Buzz Paswell, who's a distinguished professor of civil engineering. It might be given Ted's comments about how the nexus of transportation and fossil fuels together should be studied. That might be a wonderful first a step to look at this issue with another institute that exists in CUNY.
I think that would be great.
John, you work with the Hudson River Foundation, I believe, for 20-some years. What made you decide to make the change from that institute to the world of the academy, and why CUNY? I know you studied there and you got your training here.
Yeah. Well, I had a wonderful 20 years at the Hudson River Foundation, learned a lot about the aquatic realm around New York City. And it was a semi-academic position. I was able to do some research, but I missed the daily faculty contact. I missed the student contact. I was ready for a new challenge, and I had an affection for CUNY. You know, I had 2 degrees from CUNY. My wife, I met in CUNY in college. I had worked in the CUNY Central Office for a while. I had been an adjunct in the doctoral faculty for the last 10 years at the Graduate Center. So I was intimate with CUNY, and I felt I was seeing signs that CUNY was on an upswing recently. There was a potential for growth, and that it might provide a very good platform for me to bring some of what I knew from my 20 years at HRF to helping some of the problems in the New York City area. So a tempting offer was made, and I was tempted, and I said yes.
You know, I would imagine that the Institute is going to serve as a vehicle for new academic programming that could be embedded into either existing degree programs or new academic programs, and that would be a wonderful event for the university as well through the Institute. Do you see that?
I think there's tremendous potential in terms of education. Ted sponsored this new course on the nature of New York, which we ran out of Baruch and is actually going on right now, which I think has been a great success. And already we're talking about spin-offs in various ways. And as I give lectures around the city, I see a constant hunger for information about the status of nature in New York City at the layperson level, and also among educators. A lot of teachers would like to be able to bring this to the classroom in public schools. So I see many different levels and many possible venues for an educational program of some consequence in this new institute.
You know, we have a number of relationships, academic relationships with the American Museum of Natural History, and that was an area that I assume you did your research in for your PhD.
Yes.
Are you looking to develop some kind of relationship with the American Museum, with the Institute here? It seems that would be a natural fit
Yes,
as
in
well.
fact, just last night, our lecturer on biodiversity was Liz Johnson, who is involved in their biodiversity program. So we already have a connection there, and I think one of the things we'll be doing is once the Institute is configured and ready to get out there on the road and be involved with institutions, we'll be meeting with people and looking to develop relationships. So that would be a primary target.
You know, Ted, that's one of the great things, one of the many great things about this city, all of these great institutions. If we could break the boundaries that separate and seeing where we can scale up our efforts by these associations, that's a good thing.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I'm especially pleased that the executive director of CERC, the Center on Environmental Research and Conservation, which is a consortium of the New York Museum of Natural History, the New York Botanical Gardens, Columbia University, Don Melnick, who I see in the audience. They have been working very closely with Nurture New York's Nature, and I think they could be a wonderful partner in what the CUNY Institute to Nurture New York's Nature will be doing.
That sounds great. Ted, let me go into a different area. One of the missions of this alliance is to raise awareness of environmental issues, and we've been talking about that. How can we turn awareness into action? Perhaps offering guidance about what people can do. I mean, you have always been a problem solver by resolving conflicts. How do you take that long experience that you've had and create this sense of awareness and change awareness into an action plan to really get to where we as a society would like to be?
Well, I think the first most fundamental thing is creating awareness on the part of the 450,000 students of CUNY who will be the leaders of the future and who represent a population that is very similar to the population of New York City. I think the courses that will be given to the students is a very major part of creating awareness. The other thing is the use of various media of information, conferences, publications, books. We have 3 books underway, one that is to be published by the National Geographic Society. It's a children's book called Go Wild in New York City. And we believe, will help tremendously in creating awareness on the part of children, and with the science involved in nurturing the nature of New York City. David Roseanne, who is part of the course that is now being given, that John Woolman explained will be enlarged and extended in many ways, is writing a book on the nature of New York. And indeed, his PowerPoint presentation of that to the former Vice Chancellor, Louise Mira, led her to say, when we put the question, do you think it would be of interest to have a course on the nature of New York for the 400 or 450,000 students who live in this city? And she said, can that course be ready by the fall? And it was ready by the fall, and as John Woolman said, it has been extremely well received and can be and should be expanded. We have a book also by Dr. Mitchell Gaynor on environment and health. People don't understand nearly enough how damage to the environment adversely affects their health. And his book is very solid. It's been completed. We have it on the web. And Dr. Gaynor he's a famous oncologist, but very much concerned about the impact of environment on health, would be available to give lectures on the subject and to have his book as a ready reference for the students who would be taking and listening to his lecture.
You know, one of the things that I have an interest in is mathematical modeling and simulation kinds of studies. Can you imagine how wonderful it would be to be able to show what the impact on this city would be if we didn't have some of the laws that govern pollution control, and what certain levels would actually lead to? In front of a screen, people would see in real time what the effect would be. And we have some wonderful computer scientists that I'm sure would love to work with the Institute to help that. I mean, when you think about all of the integration of the intellectual energy here in this university, this institute can, you know, draw on that talent in ways that people haven't really conceived of before.
I think you are in a unique position to make a contribution to New York City that will have enduring value. You do have a talented faculty. You have the right student body. I can't think of a better organization to take on this responsibility for the benefit of the city of New York than CUNY.
Well, thank you for giving us this opportunity, and we're going to continue not to disappoint anybody. John, before we finish up, I was on the Governor Pataki's task force on Hudson River and estuaries, and you've worked, as we said, for many years studying the Hudson River. Tell us about how the river has changed in terms of its pollutants and contaminants over the years. Is it a much better Is it in a much better state, its ecosystem in a much better state today than it was, say, 20 years ago? And
Yeah, I think the improvement is extraordinary. You know, I'm old enough to remember in the 1960s and 1970s, before the Clean Water Act, oil slicks on the harbor. But in exploring the history of the harbor, I think the period around 1900 when we had the vast immigrant waves and we had no sewage treatment, at a point when Manhattan had 2 million people and not a single waste product was treated on a daily basis. There was something like 10 feet of sludge in some places around Manhattan. We lost all the oyster beds. We had vast areas of the harbor. There was no fish life. Parts of the harbor actually caught fire because of the oil pollution in the 1800s. You know, you heard about the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching fire in the 1970s. We were way ahead of them in terms of our water catching fire. So it was a horror story. It was actually beyond belief how bad it was in those periods. You look at it now, we have oysters returning to the harbor. We have herons and egrets nesting in thousands of breeding pairs on islands all around the harbor. Fish life is back in places where it disappeared. And I think probably the most impressive recovery is in the Gowanus Canal, which is legendary for its pollution. This is a place where Joseph Mitchell said only germs can live here in his fantastic book, The Bottom of the Harbor. It now has fish life, and in fact, several winters ago, a seal went up the canal in the middle of winter chasing fish in the heart of Brooklyn. And you know, what is more symbolic of recovery than a seal in the heart of Brooklyn chasing fish in the Gowanus Canal? Remarkable. So I think it's a good news story. There still are some problems. The cul-de-sacs of the harbor are the places that don't flush well and still have water pollution problems. But overall, the harbor has made an amazing recovery.
it's great to go over the Tappan Zee Bridge and look over the Hudson River at that part of the river and see how sparkling it is and how full of life it is. And it wasn't always that way. We've run out of time. I could talk for another hour at least with the two of you, but I just want to end by thanking you, Ted Keel, not only for the extraordinary work that you have done over a very sustained period of time in labor disputes, but in this new effort that you have given the city of New York and its great university here to do important work and to do work that will lead to a better understanding of the ecosystem and a better way for this university to serve its wonderful communities that depend on us every day. Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you, John. And thank you, members of our audience, for a wonderful time with these two extraordinary gentlemen. We'll see you next on CUNY Honors.